Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the SARIM webinar. My name is Tasveer Fatima, and I am representing the South Asia Research Institute for Minorities, or SARIM, based in Istanbul, Turkey. SARIM is an organization deeply committed to promoting justice, equality, and inclusion by amplifying the voices of historically marginalized and minorities communities in South Asia. We are grateful to our speakers, partners, and participants who have joined us today for this important discussion titled From Rhetoric to Risk, the Growing Threat of Hate Speech and Violence Against Minorities in 2026. This webinar focuses on a troubling and urgent reality across South Asia and beyond. We are witnessing a dangerous shift where hate speech, whether spread through social media narratives or political discourse, is increasingly translating into real-world threats, discrimination, and acts of violence against religious and caste-based and ethnic minorities. In many contexts, inflammatory language has normalized exclusion, dehumanization, and hostility. Today's discussion aims to examine how hate speech is evolving in 2026, particularly in digital and political spaces. We will explore the social, political, and digital factors behind this shift and hear perspectives from our researchers and activists working closely with affected communities. We are honored to be joined by two honorable and distinguished speakers from India today, Mr. Anubhav Singh and Ms. Aishwarya Raj. So now beginning with our webinar, I would first like to welcome our first speaker, Ms. Aishwarya Amrit from India. Ms. Aishwarya's work focuses on marginalized communities, social justice, and alternative storytelling using both journalism and creative expression to highlight the lived experiences of those often excluded from mainstream narratives. Ms. Aishwarya, the floor is yours. We would love to hear you on this.
Thank you, Tasveer, and thank you, SARIM, for having me. It's always great to be here and to bring what I have understood from my experiences and work, and to also listen from the fellow panelists that there are. So I will begin talking about Bihar elections. Okay, so in 2025, we had Bihar assembly elections. And I am native of this state called Bihar in India. And during the time of election, I was very closely reporting from Bihar, and also the time when I was not reporting, I was observing the things that is going around me in Bihar. And with that observation, there was a constant reminder of and a constant reading of how does threat look like when there is a transformation or when there is a shift from threat in language to the dangers of life and dignity that any kind of rhetoric, any kind of hate speech that can bring on the affected communities. So that is how I will sort of map my conversation here. I will talk a little bit about what I have seen on ground, how the things that I have seen is very contradictory to the local histories itself, and how this contradiction is given birth by the rhetoric, most of which is circulated through social media, and most of which is circulated through the mainstream, the so-called mainstream TV news anchors and the TV journalism that happens in India. So I will first start from deconstructing what is the potential of a rhetoric. What can a rhetoric actually do? And I will borrow from my own academic training of philosophy and then my own praxis of media practice. So I think when we talk about language or when we talk about rhetoric, there is a very common understanding that if certain idea is repeated around human beings, certain idea if it is fed to human beings time and again, for some time, which could be very permanent or which could have some kind of temporary kind of survival. In those timelines, the human beings tend to believe the rhetoric, especially if the rhetoric is not about their communities. That is where the lived experience part comes. For example, there is a ex-person from Muslim community, Muslim religious community in Bihar, and if there is a hate speech full of misinformation being circulated around them, what does this hate speech in real life do to the rural neighborhood of a state like Bihar, which has Muslim as well as Hindu populations? Let's try to think how rhetoric works and how it sort of changes the sentiments of a neighborhood. Now, it would be very false to say that some kind of religious prejudices do not exist. I mean, in India, we had the Babri Masjid demolition. We also have here and there hate speeches against Muslim communities, very, very common to everyday conversations. Being said that, how are these sentiments sort of validated by the state and by the larger structures and by the institutions. And what does that validation do to the rhetoric itself is something that we are trying to think here. So, in most parts of rural Bihar, even in the lower middle class communities, even in the families that are marginal farmers, some of the low income group OBC and EBC communities are also now able to afford a television. Now, what does this family look like? This family has, if it has male members who are 18 plus, most of the men of these families are migrant workers. So we are not talking about families who are very class and caste privileged. Rather, we are talking about these families from rural parts of Bihar who stand on intersection or crossroads of different kinds of marginalizations and disadvantage themselves. But then on document, they are Hindu families. This is what we are looking at. So these families are from Bihar, which is a state in India that oftentimes struggles with resources and literacy, and there is a the digital divide is very large. The second characteristic is that these are the families again who are either marginal farmers or they do not hold land. And I'm not talking about the constitutional category of SC or the Dalit families. I'm only talking about the lower middle class OBC and EBC families that I have observed, and that was main part of what I was reporting or observing the behavior of in context of Bihar election and the hate speech against the Muslim communities and how that is happening, how that production is happening. And then the younger members of these families are mostly again migrating to say Hyderabad, to Delhi, to Punjab, to Kolkata. And those younger members of the family, the male members of the family are living there, earning, living in very low income group colonies, uh, in colonies that are the city slum, what we called. And then by living that kind of life standard in the cities, the male members, the young male members of the families are able to send certain amount of money back home to the rural parts of Bihar where their families are living. So what we understand is that these are Hindu families, but then they are very distant from the larger institutions. Many of these families do not even have any young member who is even a part of a central university. Many of these families do not have any person from their family or extended family who even has a government job. It means how the knowledge is created within the institutions, in the media, by the government, through the Twitter. What kind of politics is working there is something that is very unfamiliar to the families from a TV. And sometimes a family of six people or say seven people can have one Android phone also. And most times the spaces where the TV and these Android phone exist is inhabited by the older men of the family. Now these what does the routine of these older men from rural parts of Bihar look like? So if they are marginal farmers, they have to give their body and their labor in the fields, and they are able to grow only the amount of crop through which they can sustain themselves. They cannot make money, a kind of money that could be considered as income or family income. That is not the amount of crops that they're able to grow. And most times they would even not have the land that are cultivable. So they would also work. So older member of the families would also work in say land of other same caste families who have little more land than what they have. Again, by the definition, they are all falling under the categories of marginal farmers. We are not talking about any feudal kind of farmers or those kind of families or communities here. So what is interesting is what does rhetoric do to the psychology of the people? So the men from lower middle class OBC and EBC families, they would tire their bodies working on the field. They would also participate in the domestic chores of the household, some of them. And by the night, their bodies are very tired. Okay, so now they want some outside information, some kind of conversation that does not exist in their immediate surrounding, but some kind of information that is being told to them from things like TV, from things like YouTube or Android phone, and they come with the instinct to totally believe what is being told. They are not engaging with these conversations on TV, on the mainstream TV channels, from a lens of criticality. Because by the end of the day, the body is very tired. They also come from backgrounds where they did not have very critical kind of educational training. But interestingly, what they had was a culture where there was no hate kind of notions against Muslims. And this point I will come back to. What I mean by the local culture, which did not have any kind of encouragement towards hate. This is one point that I will come back to. And this is very, very important and interesting part I mean, for people who are doing culture studies, for people who are doing philosophy, and even for people who are doing caste studies, especially, I mean, taking the rural areas of Bihar or other states which have this kind of similar culture kind of overlapping. So now these old men, and especially what I have observed is that these are men, because women at that point of time are often busy preparing food or in the kitchen or looking after the children of the households. So these men, I mean 50 plus men, would then sit with the remote in their hand, and now they are engaging with whatever is shown on the TV, and they have a tendency to have full faith on it. And now what rhetoric is being fed to them. So time and again, every day, all the time, there are TV news anchors dressed in a way that tells these people in far away land that these are the people who are educated, and these are the people that they can believe in, because these are the people who are dressed in a way which looks like they could be from very good institutes, very good place of education, and hence they should be, and they would be telling the truth. So now these people, this side of the TV, are approaching um, these news anchors on that side of the screen as truth tellers. So now this kind of relationship is built. And there are many psychologies that acted here in building this kind of relationship. The positionality of the watchers, the audience, and how they interpret those people who are appearing on the TV, well, in very good dress, in suit and everything, and very well put together hair and very fine language and very fine Hindi. Because these people are not even the people who speak a very Sanskritized and very clean Hindi. They even the Hindi that they speak has very, what they call so-called local accent. So very local Bihari accent is what their Hindi even carries. So they have assumed that these people on the TV are truth tellers, and then we move to what is the role of the truth tellers, what these truth tellers are doing, and what kind of truth are they telling, and how this is not just giving misinformation or disinformation. Rather, this is epistemic injustice, of course, but it's kind of it's criminal in some sense. I mean, how I see it. So now these truth tellers have all the datas, they have a green screen, and then they are building narratives of hate around the Muslim communities. And when they're saying Muslim, they have no data to support it. They have no concrete stories to support it. These are just fake narratives, and these are just words being repeated again and again, every day on the TV, every day told to the people. And these are some words, for example, love jihad, land jihad, thug jihad. And then there are words like ghuspaitiye. There are ministers of, some parties who are in power telling that in Bihar elections, we don't want vote of the people who are ghuspaitiyas. And these conversations come in a very linear, uh, very come in a way that they are packaged as truth, and come from places of power, come from places of institutional validation. So all of these things makes the rhetoric more dangerous and increases the real life danger of lives being taken, of dignities being harmed, and rhetoric of language slowly being manufactured as harms that are being done on the land. But I think that is the third part where we will come to. So what happens is very, again, very psychologically interesting, that this man who has not seen this kind of the artificially manufactured evil Muslim that this TV anchor is telling this person sitting on this side of the TV screen, is something which is very alien to this man, because this man around his surrounding has not seen anybody like that. This man has relationships with Muslims are in his neighborhood in terms of, say, friendship, in terms of, say, some kind of business barter, in terms of, say, some kind of local livelihood or local ecosystem that there is. But then this man has no lived experience of a Muslim person looking or behaving the way that the TV anchors tell this man that they are. So then we have a very fictional, religious minority. We have a fictional Muslim. And in the beginning, this person is very alien to this fictional Muslim that is being told to this person by the truth tellers on the TV. But then what language does and what politics does is very interesting here. So now this person is being told the same thing again and again since years. I mean, the examples that I'm bringing are from certain parts of South Bihar, and I have been here time and again. I was also here during COVID also. I was also here before COVID also, and I have seen how the truth value that people are associating towards the words that are told by the TV anchor, and similar kind of videos on YouTube that are also taken from the words of the TV anchor. So the kind of truth that is believed by the audience, the intensity of believing in that truth has increased with the years, and this increase is happening due to many other elements, and those elements are again things like Babri Masjid demolition. Supreme Court had a judgment, but then people would just sit on the TV. They would have anchors, they would have speakers who would again and again. So people from places of power, from political parties, from government jobs, from the people who are so-called educated in good institutions and so-called good media institutions, would time and again sort of say things in order to build a narrative that again comes back to the core, which is creating a bad. And we have to very well understand what the institutions are doing here. The institutions are not sort of canceling these narratives that are being propagated from the TV channels. If the TV channel if they circulated a fake news, uh, what we expect as citizens or as researchers or as media practitioners is that somebody from place of accountability, somebody from the government would maybe come out in the public and give a statement cancelling all these misinformation and disinformation that are being propagated. And interestingly, there is no such cancellation that is happening. So now this person who has no exposure to how the knowledge production in the places of power and in the places of policy making and in the places of media is working is very inclined to borrow everything that is being told to them if this person is not from the affected community. And of course, this person is not from the affected community. But the creation of an evil fictional Muslim, what I understand, just does not create the dangers of hate speech, of violence, and everything. But it is also the erasure of the history of the OBC and EBC communities, also. The other backward class and the extremely backward class, which in the anti caste discourse, many times we refer to as Shudra, many times we refer to as Bahujan. When this Bahujan community or when this Shudra community believes in this kind of anti-Muslim theories and hate speech, their their belief is not just putting the seeds of hate, but their belief is also taking away their own histories from themselves. And this is what is very interesting, and this is what needs to be told to people. And why do I argue when I am making this argument, and or what is my premise and observation that I am making this argument that I am? So for example, in Bihar we have and we also have that in other states, we have many local gods in these cities, and these local gods are not the Vedic gods. These local gods are not the so-called the Hindu gods that are being propagated by the different institutions and Ram Mandir discourse and everything. These are the local gods of the different caste communities of the villages. These are the local ancestral gods of the families of these rural parts of Bihar, of these lower middle class OBC and EBC communities. And these local gods are not necessarily Hindu gods. So I'll tell a very interesting story. So there was this very old woman, 80-year-old woman, and people say, the local people say that she, at some parts of the years, she is being possessed by the gods of the village. And then whatever she speaks are the words spoken by the village gods. Now, there could be a discourse. I mean, some rationals would say that, this discourse of being possessed and everything is a mental health illness, or they could also say that nothing of this sort happens. But from the point that I am speaking, I would like to argue in the favor of decolonizing knowledge, of decolonizing body, and of decolonizing human emotion themselves. I think that is what South Asian knowledge system and discussions should be in the core of it. So I am speaking from a point that what is happening in the space. I mean, what kind of conversations is happening? So this very old woman from very lower class of OBC family, of a marginal class, marginal farmer family, and this example is just one instance. If we come to these parts of India, this is very common. So she's being possessed by, say, 15 or 10 local gods of the village. One of the god is meant in the folk understanding. One of the god is meant to be the protector of the village. One of the god is meant to be a god who just looks after all the spirits of the village and things like that. And two of the local gods are Muslim peers. So when this woman would be possessed by a Muslim peer, the other women and the men sitting around the woman would say Salam Baba. Now, salam, people in this context think is salam is a word that a word of salutation used by Muslim communities in a very rural in a very folk sense. So the people who are watching these, these hate news and hate speeches on the TV would very interestingly switch to the language saying salam, because they understand that this peer is a Muslim peer. So to respect the Muslim peer, we would not say pranam baba, because pranam or those kind of words in their head, in their local language, is something that is given to a Hindu local god. So now this Muslim local god would be saluted in their own context. They would not appropriate the language of salutation, and they would talk to this woman now, who is now believed and understood by the local people to be possessed by the Muslim peer, in a way that they were talking to their Hindu gods. They would come with their, very small problems, like my daughter is not getting married, and this emotionally charged space, a space of healing and a very complex kind of space becomes. And this space also has presence of a Muslim god. And to me, it's very interesting. How can these two contradictory, situations exist in the same villages, in the same communities? So it means when this person, or when many persons or many people who are part of, a scenario like this, a very emotionally charged, a very, a place where people have just come as believers, people are now around this Muslim god, and they believe this Muslim god to be a very integral part of their ecosystem, their values, their, their culture, their families. And they're also changing their own, even the language, to have this kind of communication with the Muslim God. There's no sense of there's no sense of hatred or anything negative or any kind of othering in that. How are these families, or why are these families, or what kind of crime is it for, for different kind of communication channels to be feeding these families the hatred against the Muslim communities? So what I believe is that it's, of course, larger degree of violence against the Muslim bodies, and the probability of violence on the Muslim bodies is more, and is done by the non-Muslim uh, bodies by believing in this rhetoric. But it is also sort of erasing the knowledge, the South Asian knowledge system. It is also creating, these people who would believe in hate, who would buy these rhetoric, and in doing so, they are erasing their own history, their own generational knowledge, and their own truth. And when I say there, I don't mean just non-Muslim OBC, EBC bodies, but when I say there, I mean the ecosystem that they have generationally grown in and around. So this to me is very, when I say criminalization, this to me is a cultural, in a very cultural sense, it's we are criminalizing some bodies, and in doing so, we are taking away the cultures and the belief system and the kind of very organic ecosystem that people had. So hence, I think if we were to talk about a solution to that, coming to the last part of the thing that I am speaking around, I think we need to have a rich understanding, and we need to take back the people to their own present, to their own community stories. We need to have a dialogue. We need to have a place where people are able to, identify and understand what is the truth, and what is rather not the truth, but is being told by the truth tellers. People need to be taken back to their own experiences, that their own lived experiences that they have, which is, of course, very oppositional to this fictional evil Muslim that is being created and then painted time and again, time and again, time and again through different kind of tweets and speeches and things like that. What does creation of a evil fictional Muslim person does? Again, it's a very sad story, but I will also, I would like to talk about that also before I end whatever I'm saying. So, in the same village, there was this very young boy, 12, 13 years old. And because I also work in that village for, free library and free education access for the community children there. So I have these conversations with the younger kids, right? So in one of the conversations, this very young boy came to me and he told me that in his local government school, a Muslim, very young Muslim woman teacher came to teach there. And she must have been, say somewhere between 23 to 25, right? And these young kids, these young 10-year, 12-year-old kid would write Jai Shri Ram on their copies, and they would go to this teacher and they would ask her to read what is written there, right? And few times this teacher said that, she might have made very polite excuse to take herself out of that situation. And this situation only has these young children and this teacher. So now what happened is that, so few of the boys felt that these other students, what they're doing is not right. So but then they did not say anything there. They came back and they told me the story. And then I asked what happened next. So this young Muslim uh, women teacher felt unsafe and was so, I mean, she felt so other in some sense that she asked for a transfer. Now we also have to understand that somebody, a government teacher, had to change their workplace, had to get herself transferred. In that transfer, there could have been much labor. I mean, she might have to look for a new place to live, the new place where she's been transferred. What does that workplace look like? In the process of transfer, there could have been, many of the paperwork and other things. So what I mean is that this transfer is very unnecessary. It should not have happened with anyone. But what made this transfer happen? A bunch of very young kids, a bunch of young kids who are just 10 and 12 years old, a bunch of young kids who by the time they are 18 or 19 are fated to be migrant workers. And I don't mean to say that the migrant workers don't have their problems, but I'm trying to deconstruct how this hate speech works at a very local level, which is not, I mean, which is not a very black and white kind of lens to understand it, but there's many gray that is happening, and there are many agents and elements that are contributing in their own ways. And until unless we don't identify how those things are happening on a grassroots level, we would not be able to, propose a solution of how to undo what is happening. So again, how I understand, coming to the very last part of whatever I'm speaking here today, is that um, we would have to take the communities. We would have to take the communities back to their local knowledge system. We would have to take the communities back to the very indigenous ideas of belief system that they have, where there is much place of and where there is much fluidity of faith, where there is much place for differences of religions to be, but there's much place for all the faiths to exist. And when I say all the faith, I am not referring to, again, the Vedic gods or the very Brahminical gods. I'm referring to very indigenous gods, where even gods have different stories with each other. I mean, that could be a whole very different, a new conversation. But this is what I think. And I think um, the answer against hate speech should be stories, should be experiences taken from the ground, the histories that already exist, and then formulated in a way that these people whose lived experience do not tell them about a evil fictional Muslim are able to come back to their own history, are able to come back to their own ideas of life that they had, which is only fractured because they think that whatever the institutions or the so-called media is telling is the only truth, and maybe the truth that they know has some kind of shortcomings. So yes, this is what I wanted to bring to today's conversations. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, Miss Aishwarya. I really loved how you share your lived experiences and you spoke on behalf of the religious minorities, specifically Muslims of India. And thank you so much again for sharing your thought-provoking insights. I would now like to welcome our second speaker, Mr. Anubhav Singh, who is a Dalit activist and an independent researcher currently based between Massachusetts and India. His work centers on caste-based discrimination, structure equalities, and the lived realities of Dalit communities, combining academic research with grassroots advocacy. Mr. Anubhav, you can now unmute yourself and share your thoughts on the hate speech rhetoric.
For inviting me, and of course, Aishwarya for setting this up so brilliantly by talking about how hate is produced at the local level and through examples in Bihar and the local economy. And I would like to build on that using a little bit of my own framework that I've recently been working on, which talks about an effective economy of hate that we've been witnessing not just in India or in South Asia, but also wherever authoritarianism rather is currently in progress. So whether it's, we've seen it under Bolsonaro in Brazil or under Trump in America. Hate speech, we often treat it as a problem of language, that, someone has spoken some offensive words or words that incite people. But hate speech, in my opinion, is just rarely speech. It's a part of an emotional ecosystem. It prepares the ground for violence, not only just by spreading falsehoods, but it also shapes how people feel about themselves, how they feel about the idea of, let's say, the nation state, or how they feel about religious minorities or people, anyone who is otherized. So to understand the danger of hate speech anywhere, and I'll take India as a generative case here, We must understand the effective economy in which whatever hate speech is circulating in. So a few years ago, when the anti-CAA and anti-NRC protests were going on in India in 2020, the slogan that was raised by a popular politician was "Desh ke gaddaron ko, goli maro salo ko." So that slogan was not policy. It was not an argument, but when he utters or when he speaks that particular slogan, you see that the people who are attending his rally, they complete it. So he stops at Desh ke gaddaron ko, and then the people shout back "Goli maro." So it emerges as a sort of a collective emotional ritual. It creates a moment where shared anger or shared aggression, it feels patriotic. The people feel that they're part of a project which is somehow larger than their individual identity, and the target, which is of course implicitly Muslims and anyone who is dissenting against the state. They are cast aside, or rather they are cast outside their own moral community. So hate speech is not just that it is insulting, rather it is authorizing people to to make violence. It makes violence imaginable. So this kind of a violence is actually called stochastic violence. Rather, if we use an anti-terrorist framework that I've used in some of my work, it calls it stochastic terrorism. That is, it creates a probabilistic field of violence where violence can come from anywhere. The probability of violence occurring towards whoever is cast as the other, in India's case it's Muslims, is very high, and that violence is, no matter who is behind it, it feels very justified. It feels moral. For example, if you look at another recurring example in the Indian context, it is that Muslim men, they pose a sort of a sexual threat or a demographic threat to the Hindu nation, which is framed through this idea of love jihad or population jihad. So what this narrative does is that it sexualizes and criminalizes Muslim masculinity, and it casts Hindu women as a vulnerable property of the Hindu community, and it positions Hindu men as protectors. So the emotional effect is generated is extremely powerful. It produces fear. It also activates a sort of a masculine honor among Hindu men, and then it casts protection of Hindu women as a moral duty. So anyone from within the crowd can become a protector and just go and harass an interfaith couple and say that this is not right. Why? Because it's been cast as something immoral. And protection of Hindu men from the Muslim men, it's become a sort of a moral duty. So in this atmosphere, harassment, surveillance, and violence begins to feel very justified. So emotions of the people are being reorganized by hate speech. So, and it is not just at the level of words, it moves through an entire ecosystem, which I call the affective ecosystem of hate. It's political speeches, it's television debates like Aishwarya talked about, it's YouTube channels, it's WhatsApp forwards, it's the meme culture, and also increasingly popular cinema, where Bollywood has sort of emerged as an arm of the state, or as an arm of the Hindutva ideology. So, in my recent work in contemporary Hindi cinema, I've shown that how certain films repeatedly depict minorities, particularly Muslims, as internal enemies or terrorists or traitors. So these films are not direct calls to violence, but they serve as affective training grounds. So they create a very simplified moral universe that the majority is innocent, the majority is patriotic, but the minority is suspect, and the minority is disloyal. And so state aggression, or rather popular aggression towards them, is necessary. It's sort of heroic. So consistent, repeated exposure towards such kind of words creates a sort of a moral universe, an emotional universe where empathy is narrowed and people are always activated, functioning at a level of extremely high suspicion, where suspicion is normalized. So when such kind of emotional rhetoric they circulate alongside cultural narratives and political rhetoric, a system emerges where they are reinforcing each other, and these emotions that are being generated kind of stick to whoever is being otherized, particularly Muslim men. So this is an affective economy. So we have this new system of generating small reels of a few seconds, where sort of people who call themselves Hindutva influencers, they, say certain words or, accuse the Muslim minority of doing something like, oh, they're taking over our temples, or they're taking over our festivals, or they're taking over our women. And so not only is this extractive in an emotional sense, it is generating revenue for them. And it, at the same time, what it is also doing is that it is circulating emotions like anger, fear, pride, humiliations. So they are being produced, they are being reproduced, they are being strengthened, reinforced, they are circulated, they're amplified. And in this sort of economy, outrage generates attention and fear generates loyalty. So you'll see people, subscribing them, and then we have had instances where the government actually has, in one way or another, they have sort of used the services of these influencers to even polarize votes. Either whether it's through memes, it's through conspiracy theories which are being circulated on television through our news anchors, or and of course Aishwarya talked about how this changes the behavior of the people and it recasts their history, or the normal history of coexistence or tolerance is eroded. So, but there's also a sort of a difficult question which Aishwarya also talked about, is that why do ordinary people, that is including some Dalits, OBCs, and even Adivasis, why do they support majoritarian politics given that they are themselves being exploited by this Brahminical system? So the answer is, it's not simply ignorance. There are many people who are experiencing economic insecurity because of neoliberalization. They are socially marginalized, and of course, there is an enforced lack of dignity, which is enforced through the Brahminical system. But in a lot of ways, from what I can draw from my own research, is that this sort of politics, this majoritarian sentiment, it offers people an affective compensation, like a symbolic belonging to being, of a project which is larger than their identity, or they are part of a powerful collective identity. So, it offers them sort of a psychological wages of dominance, that being part of the larger Hindu identity, I'm actually superior to Muslims. So, it's like moments, sometimes they're small, sometimes dramatic, where one feels elevated. So even if one remains marginalized within the caste hierarchies, one is assured that one belongs to the part of the real nation. So when minorities are vilified, they are humiliated, or a sort of an experience, the experience is of a temporary sense of, pride, a sort of pride being restored for people who have always been at the margins of the Hindu caste system. So these psychological wages are not eliminating inequality, but rather they're enforcing hierarchy. But it feels that that hierarchy is morally justified. For example, of late, we have noticed that particularly in North India, there has been a shift amongst Dalits, OBCs, and Adivasis towards the BJP. And there probably has also been a shift in ideological terms towards the towards Hindutva. So, the question is why? It's stumped many researchers, and many researchers are researching or talking about it, that why has this happened, particularly from 2014? Because before 2014, it was just assumed that Dalits are a homogeneous block, or, that being Dalit is a homogeneous identity, or OBCs are a homogeneous identity, so they're going to vote one way. But that is no longer the case, that the BJP has been able to make substantial inroads within these people, both in terms of, as far as votes are concerned, but also in ideological terms. So, and what is also interesting is that whereas the neoliberal politics of both the BJP and the Congress has resulted in them being economically marginalized and increasing poverty in India, where the wealth is being concentrated in just a few hands, particularly those people who the capitalists and who belong to the upper class and upper castes. But what Hindutva has been successfully able to do, and is that it's been able to generate a sort of a sense of restored pride amongst such people. So, the emotional life of people is being rewritten and reshaped as a whole. So these people may be experiencing caste-based violence, but that anger is being redirected. So momentarily, even the anger or the feeling of being excluded is drawn away, because such kind of speech it makes them feel part of a larger Hindu identity, which until now they've not been able to, feel that. So this path from hate speech to violence is gradual, but it's quite real. So when minorities are being repeatedly described as traitors or invaders or demographic threats, their citizenship is constantly being morally downgraded. So their suffering becomes less visible, and the attacks against them are being more, they are more easily excused, not only at a social level but also at an institutional level. So violence no longer appears shocking; it appears restorative. So when violence feels restorative, democracy is already in a crisis. What BJP has been very successfully able to do is that it has been able to create certain myths that appeal to people who belong to this marginalized class and marginalized class. So, for example, if we talk of Parsis, they tell them that, Raja Suhail Dev, which was your ancestor, actually fought against Muslims. So, you are actually Hindu warriors. So, even though they lie at the, the margin of the Hindu caste order, but that caste order is hierarchical and they lie at the very bottom of it. But even by being at the bottom of it, they feel a sense of pride of being, the protector of the Hindu community, or the protector of Hindu women. They themselves are not allowed to be part of the larger Hindu society as a whole. But by being recast as protectors, they feel that they've become part of an identity which is larger than themselves, a political project which is larger than themselves. So, when we talk of hate speech, we must look beyond the language. We must strengthen institutional accountability. These media ecosystems which are profiting from outrage and which they need to be challenged. And we must ensure that, there are alternative channels where exclusion does not feel normal. And most importantly, we must refuse this idea that belonging is a zero-sum game, that one community's pride requires another's humiliation. Because hate speech is not just merely an excess of words. It's part of a system which is constantly organizing emotions. It is authorizing suspicion. It is preparing society for violence. And if we fail to understand that affective dimension, we are actually underestimating the danger that hate speech poses to communities as a whole. So yeah, I'd like to end there, and thank you very much, SARIM, for inviting me. Thank you very much.
Sharing your views on the hate speech and also highlighting the sensitive nature of this subject and what impact does it leaves on the psychological impact it leaves on the people. So both of our speakers, Ms. Aishwarya and Mr. Anubhav, thank you for your time and commitment for raising your voice against the injustices and against the hate speech for minority communities. And thank you so much to our viewers also. At SARIM, we believe that amplifying these voices is the first step towards change. Stay connected with us through sarimwatch.original and our social media pages for more dialogues on peace, inclusion, and minority rights in South Asia. Until next time, this is Tasveer Fatima signing off. Thank you so much to both of you. Until next time.